This episode is brought to you by Flying Eyes. Stick around later in the episode to find out how to get 10% off. My name is Trevor Aldridge. I flew for the United States Air Force Thunderbirds, and I flew F-15s across England, Japan, and the Middle East, where I got my call sign, Duzit. Now, I travel the country looking for my next adventure. This is Doesn't Does It. It was the day before Oshkosh, and we went up to the Debonair, we loaded it up, and we flew out of XNA and started heading north towards Wisconsin. It was a really cool opportunity to get to kind of chase around the clouds, pick up IFR clearances when we needed to, and really get prepared for the Fisk Arrival, which was going to be, in and of itself, its own adventure. On the way down, one of the questions I think that's asked is, why Oshkosh? I've flown F-16s, 18 inches for another aircraft at 500 miles an hour doing loops and rolls. I've flown F-15s at twice the speed of sound across the world. Why go to this place where they just have a bunch of aircraft around? Honestly, Oshkosh is the mecca of aviation, and particularly when it comes to experimental aircraft. It's where the Experimental Aircraft Association, EAA's chapter headquarters is. It's where their museum is. It is an incredible place where literally thousands and thousands of aircraft and even more aviators come together to talk about and look at the cool aspects of aviation, whether it's historical or it's modern experimental aircraft. We flew into Oshkosh, and that Fisk Arrival in and of itself was its own adventure. I mean, there were, within a 5-mile scope, we had about 10 or 15 aircraft that were all around us that we were seeing on our transponder. So it was quite an adventure, and if you want to check more about that, there's a whole nother episode showing just our arrival into Oshkosh. We landed at Oshkosh right around sunset, literally about 10 to 15 minutes before the sunset, and about 10 to 15 minutes before they shut the airfield. Had we not made it in, I don't know where we would have landed or where we would have stayed. We would have been camping without camping gear somewhere in the middle of Wisconsin. But fortunately, we made it in right before they shut down. We landed, we taxied, and we shut down, got our luggage, and we started putting up our tents. And honestly, that is truly the best way to experience Oshkosh. Yes, you're camping, but you're in a tent, you're sleeping next to your airplane, and you have nice showers and food, and you have all the amenities that you need. But in the morning, you get woke up at 6 a.m. with a P-51 Mustang, the sound of that aircraft roaring over. That's your alarm clock in the morning. So we woke up the first day and we wanted to go flying in something else. And I've never really had the opportunity to fly a Cessna 185. That's a tailwheel aircraft. It's a good backcountry aircraft. And there was a mutual friend who had one that said, let's go fly. And so we traveled all the way from the south end of the airfield, all the way up to the north end of the airfield, which took quite a bit of time to get there. And we got to see this really cool, unique yellow Cessna 185. Him and his dad hopped in it. I was in the right seat, and we got to fly out over some water and come back and land. And honestly, it was a really cool experience just to get to fly something new that I'd never flown before. We took a look around at some of the booths that were going on around Oshkosh, and one of the ones I really liked was a cutout of the PT6 engine. PT6 engine is a turbine engine. It's used in the T6 Texan II, it's used in the Pilatus PC-12, as well as many other turboprops. And they had this cutout section where you could see the airflow going in, where the compression happens, where the combustion is, and the exhaust, and it was a pretty cool thing to see. Another booth that I thought was kind of cool was a company called Plane Tags. What they do is they take decommissioned aircraft or aircraft that are otherwise going to be scrapped, and they save and preserve some skin keychain, essentially. And I thought it was really interesting getting to check them out side by side, because when you took a look at the T-38, right, this aircraft that was built in the 1960s, but with American technology, it had a really thin layer on it because the skin was pretty thin, because that's how it's designed. And then you look at the MiG-29, they had another cutout on the MiG-29, and the thickness of the skin was just so much thicker. That Russian, USSR, Soviet style design, thick, beefy, kind of indestructible, but incredibly heavy, which limits your payload and other things. And so it was really interesting to see the design style between the T-38, light, fast, nimble, and the Russian MiG-29, which was thick, beefy, rugged, but a lot heavier. Another thing that I found really interesting is they had a section for the Zeros, the old Japanese Zeros from World War II, and those were notorious for having incredibly thin skin. So much so that it was a huge advantage for them because they could make an incredibly light aircraft. But it's so thin that they wouldn't even put them on display. They had put a tag and said, if you want it, come take a look at it, because otherwise people would be bending it as they were looking at it. It was just that thin of a metal. After the air show was over, we had the opportunity to kind of wander around Oshkosh a little bit. And one of my favorite sections was the Stagger wing collection. The Stagger wings were made by Beechcraft back in the 30s, and they're just an absolutely beautiful aircraft. And there was literally rows of these rare aircraft that you don't see that collection anywhere else in the world, but you could see them side by side and all these beautiful aircraft right at sunset. Man, it was gorgeous. From there, we went to the STOL competition. So STOL stands for short takeoff and landing. It's really a competition to see how fast you can take an airplane off in the shortest distance and how short you can land. And it was really cool getting to see a few of the people that I know that I've run into or I've had the opportunity to fly with, see them actually out there competing in their aircraft, whether it was a Storch or Kit Foxes or whatever, even a Cessna 170. It was really cool to get to see the different aircraft out there competing, showing off how short they can land aircraft. As the sun was going down, we had the opportunity to see these hot air balloons that they were putting up into the air. And honestly, it was pretty amazing to see the size and scope of them. I haven't spent a whole lot of time around hot air balloons. And so getting to learn about the hot air balloons, learn about how they've evolved throughout aviation, kind of the rules and regulations that they adhere to, and then seeing it in person with the flames, with just an incredible amount of heat filling up the air, there with the sunset glowing up as you're throwing fire into a balloon. It was pretty wild, it was pretty cool. On the way back, we actually got to see some paramotors, and it's a paramotor like demonstration team that they have lights, and it was kind of cool to see there. Honestly, I think being at sunset is really what made that special. One of the funny things is that you run into people and things that you weren't expecting to see at Oshkosh. And so one of those things is that we were walking by and all of a sudden I look over and there's my squadron's aircraft, the 97th Flying Training Squadron. They had their T6 on display and it had come all the way from Wichita Falls where I train at. And sitting at the end of it was an instructor pilot that I was able to go up to, have this awesome conversation with, and the person that he was talking to was randomly the original commander for the 97th Squadron that I'm a member of that I had never met before. And we were able to jump into this really long, cool conversation talking about people that we knew in common, the history of the squadron, what it's been through and what it's done. It's just, you don't get experiences like that anywhere else. One of the cool things that happens at Oshkosh that you can honestly have the entire show and just look at airplanes and be content for a full week, but they have a really incredible air show that goes on almost every single day, and they have night air shows too. We had the opportunity to run into our friend Kyle Fowler. I've had the opportunity to run into him in the past, but now I get to see him. He lands. I talked to him about his experiences flying the air show. The Long Easy is a wild aircraft with engine in the back, canards up front, and he really max performs that aircraft. So Oshkosh has some of the latest and greatest experimental aircraft. They have historical warbirds, but then they also have older airplanes. And so one of the cool ones was seeing the Grand Waldo Pepper, which is an old movie from back in the day, but they had recreated this aircraft to be the same as it was back in the day. And it's a really cool biplane with a skid on the back. And to get to talk to people who literally a person standing next to is one of the guys who built the aircraft and learn about what the aircraft is and the history behind it and the technology that was used back in the day, you can see the entire evolution of aviation from the beginning to where we're at now. The next day on Wednesday, we went to go see the ScaleWings P-51, and honestly, it was the highlight of the show. This is a carbon fiber Mustang. So you take a Mustang, you take the spars, the wings, everything, and instead of making it out of aluminum and steel, you make it out of carbon fiber. So it's stronger and it's lighter than any other Mustang made before. And what really makes that aircraft special is that in the molds, they put divots for every rivet and every screw. They've designed it in a way that it looks proportionate exactly the same to original P-51, but you're getting a brand new modern technology carbon fiber aircraft that's incredibly strong, incredibly reliable at about a tenth the price of an original Mustang, and your operating costs are about a tenth the price. They had just shipped this over from Europe, and it was literally one of the first times that it flew in public was there at Oshkosh when they just got it out of the crate, put it together, and flew it at Oshkosh. And Oshkosh is really the only place where you see those types of aircraft at. From the P-51, we literally just hopped about 30 feet over to Garmin, and we got to have a meet and greet. So it was pretty cool getting to connect with people that follow me on Instagram and follow me on YouTube and talk to them about what they're doing in aviation and answer the questions they have and really have that one-on-one experience with the fans. So one of the most talked about aircraft that was there at Oshkosh was the Vans RV-15. Vans traditionally has made the RV-6, the RV-8, RV-7, these different aircraft that are canopy aircraft, low wing, meant to go cross country and do some basic aerobatics. And they've really done a great job in that market. And now they're completely turning their design upside down and they're going with a high wing backcountry style aircraft. There's a huge following for Vans RV aircraft, and now that they're making this backcountry aircraft, there's a lot of people that are really excited about it. So to get to see the engineering prototype there and what they're doing to come up with their best version of a backcountry aircraft had a lot of attention on it. There were people around the aircraft all the time, and getting to see it up close was pretty cool. From there, we had to run over to another section of Oshkosh that a lot of people don't see, and that's their Seabase. So they have this water port where there's all these aircraft on floats. And the atmosphere there is completely different than the rest of Oshkosh. Oshkosh is busy, bustling, there's a lot of people, it's high energy. And then you go over to the water base and it's nice and calm and slowed down. And we got to run into a company that is doing some pretty incredible work called Samaritan. They go to Papua New Guinea and they fly Cessna 206 on floats to these remote locations, and they provide medical supply and airlift for people in dire need that otherwise would not survive the situation. They go land on these really windy rivers in the middle of New Guinea, some pretty dangerous flying, and they do it as a philanthropic activity. And honestly, getting to fly that airplane, that highly modified 206, and hear the story of what they do was a really fascinating experience. So last day we were at Oshkosh, we had to get out of there, we had to go back home. Unfortunately, I had to cut it a little bit short because I had to go learn how to fly the Airbus, but we packed up our tent, we packed up the airplane, did a really good pre-flight after leaving it sitting there for a week. We taxied out, we got to the runway, lots of comm, lots of radios, took off, and flew all the way home. Honestly, it was an incredible experience. Oshkosh, if you've never been and you're at all interested in aviation, you've got to find a time to get out there some way. Either fly in or go commercial into Chicago or drive in, however you can get there, find a way to get there. It was really an awesome time. So hope you all enjoyed it, and we'll see y'all there next time. So this episode has been brought to you by Flying Eyes. Honestly, these are some of my favorite sunglasses I've ever flown with. They're incredibly durable. They've got polycarbonate lenses. And if you want to get a pair of these, go to Flying Eye Optics. Check out with code DOZEN and you get 10% off and you help support the channel as well.